Welcome back to State of the Nation. The American philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "The louder he talked of his honour, the faster we counted our spoons." Nothing illustrates this point better than the moment Tony Blair said this to John Humphreys in 1997 over the Eccleston affair.
Never do anything either to harm the country or anything proper. I never have. I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
A pretty straight sort of guy. And of course it wasn't long before this pretty straight sort of guy found that he was manipulating the country with the help of tabloid journalist Alistair Campbell into the war in Iraq. The moment any politician starts to harp on about his honour, integrity, honesty, or using platitudes like this...
We've changed the Labour Party, returned it to service.
And to replace that politics of performance with the politics of service.
And one of the big changes, if there's a Labour government, is politics returned to service.
Turn the page on an era of politics as noisy performance and return it to public service.
You know it's time to start counting the spoons, as the Prime Minister, or perhaps we should call him the Reverend Starmer, said in his speech today. He was asked about his promise to implement an Honesty and Integrity Commission with an independent chairman that could launch inquiries, as it says, independently.
It's a commitment that we made. We will stick to it. I don't have a precise date. I do think it's important that it can initiate its own inquiries, if you like, because that has been an inhibitor in the past. So that commitment stands. As soon as we've got a date, I'll give you a date.
Oh, he'll give you a date, isn't that very kind of him? But his own Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is already being accused of breaching the ministerial code after the appointment of a Labour-donoured Treasury. His independent advisor on ministerial interests, Sir Laurie Magnus, could be granted the power to launch an inquiry immediately. This has not happened. So when the Prime Minister says he will give you a date, he makes it sound as if there's some long-winded process, as if you've got to set up a committee, there's work to be done. No. He could, whilst watching this now, dictate a memorandum to say that Sir Laurie has the authority to launch independent inquiries, and that would be the power of the advisor, because it is something entirely within the remit of the Prime Minister. What he said in the Downing Street garden was prize-winning humbug. But what we're witnessing is the extraordinary rapid crumbling of trust within 50 days of Sir Keir Starmer's ascent to power. But this is not particularly surprising. Sir Keir Starmer flip-flopped on just about everything, from Jeremy Corbyn to a second referendum. Do you remember Jeremy Corbyn was his friend, and then he'd never been a friend with Jeremy Corbyn, the second referendum? Oh, the movement to free Shamima Begum, he changed his mind on that. He's now flip-flopping on the question of honour and integrity. It's reminiscent of this glorious moment in the 1942 classic Casablanca.
Everybody is to leave here immediately.
Like Captain Reynard, Sir Keir Starmer was shocked. He even used the word in his speech earlier today at what he discovered. He was shocked in that same squeaky tone of voice that indicates he knew what was going along all the time and is taking us for mugs. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. But with me now is Times columnist Melanie Phillips. Melanie, first of all, thank you so much for joining me. And you put this, I thought, very clearly in your article in the Times this morning. Even for those of us who are not natural Labour supporters, it's a pretty rapid descent into sleaze and hypocrisy, isn't it?
It is indeed. The hypocrisy is really quite something, since Sir Keir Starmer had said that he was going to end cronyism. And during the last Labour government, during the last Conservative government, he and other members of the Labour Party poured ordure over the Conservative administration for sleaze and cronyism and so on and so forth. And here we find that they are... what is it, like not even 2 months since the general election, they're absolutely mired in it, with a number of appointments being made which are extremely dubious, in that they have been people who have been either Labour Party workers or activists or donors who have been given access to Downing Street in the case of Lord Ali, a donor, or in the case of several quite senior appointments to Whitehall, people who have been Labour activists and members. Now, governments in the past have taken on people from outside Whitehall as political advisors, but there was a very clear distinction made between them and civil servants. Political advisors were political. They were political appointments. They were on, I think, short-term contracts. And it was very clear that they were, their job was political. Whereas the civil service is famously and rather wonderfully supposed to be neutral and impartial, because the same civil servants, the same officials, have to provide the same service to governments of whatever stripe. And they cannot do so if they are compromised. And what we've seen in this last few weeks is people who are highly compromised by their previous association with the Labour Party being taken on as civil servants.
One of the things I was struck by in your piece was you quote Tony Blair saying that the Labour Party is the political wing of the British people, which seems to me an enormously entitled thing to say, a very arrogant view of the world, which then means, of course, you can appoint who you like because it's what the British people want. We're their political wing. We are the masters now.
Well, very much so. It's certainly arrogant, but it's also, I think, frightening, is what I said in my article this morning, because if you say that the Labour Party is the British people, it's the political arm of the British people, then it justifies an approach to government that casts political dissent as an offence against democracy itself. And it was this attitude by Tony Blair was borne out by a comment that I saw with great interest by Pat McFadden, who is currently the minister in charge of the Cabinet Office. And he said, apropos Lord Ali's Downing Street pass, nobody knows why he was issued this pass. He did nothing to merit such a pass. It's that sort of pass to Downing Street is confined normally to civil servants and politicians. Anyway, Pat McFadden said, quote, Lord Ali, but he does bring a huge amount to the Labour Party. He was an important part of the election campaign. In other words, Pat McFadden couldn't see anything wrong in Lord Ali being given a pass, normally reserved for civil servants and political people, because he was, and members of Parliament, I should say, because he had done so much for the Labour Party. In other words, just like Tony Blair saying the Labour Party is the political arm of the British people, for Pat McFadden, and I suspect for the majority of the Cabinet and for Keir Starmer, there is no distinction to be made between party and government. And that is terrifying. That has the seeds of a totalitarian attitude to government.
So what are they doing about this? Because Starmer made a great song and dance about improving the powers of ethics within Downing Street. And there's Sir Laurie Magnus, the advisor to the Prime Minister. He hasn't said anything. His predecessors, Lord Geidt and so on, were always on resignation watch and constantly getting wound up about their position. But we haven't had anything from Sir Laurie, have we?
Not as far as I know, no. But then you see the whole business of Whitehall ethics is quite surreal, really. You have one of these questionable appointments is somebody who has been appointed to the ethics department, as it were, of the Cabinet Office, and this whole sort of questionable elision between political appointments and civil service officials really got going, as far as the Labour Party is concerned, when Sue Gray, a very significant figure in the Cabinet Office and herself a former head of the ethics division of the Cabinet Office, was poached by Keir Starmer to be his chief of staff. And there was, you may recall, quite a row about this because, there are rules governing civil servants just leaping out of Whitehall into a political party, taking with them the secrets of government. And after a considerable amount of toing and froing, there was a kind of period in which she was kind of neither one thing nor the other, which was considered to be just about okay. But nevertheless, it still left a bad taste in the mouth. And so you have at the very heart of the Starmer administration a fundamental, really questionable attitude to ethics in Whitehall, in which the people involved in ethics in Whitehall, supposedly, are themselves caught up in this highly questionable behaviour.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie, for putting it so clearly and eloquently, both in your column in The Times and with us this evening. With me now is our favourite socialist, the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Stephen, it's pretty grubby, isn't it?
Jacob, no, it isn't. Let's get a couple of things absolutely straight. Let's drag this into the daylight and get away from this ghastly conspiracy theory, this Armageddon that people seem to be promulgating. But look, Lord Ali is a member of Parliament. He had a temporary pass for 21 days, and that's finished and it's gone. That's over. Compared to, you remember, David Cameron appointing 11 people as special advisors, Boris Johnson, the veritable sultan of sleaze, putting people Stephen. Into the House of Lords with no experience.
But, well, Lord Ali himself was put into the House of Lords aged 34. It was a very young appointment at the time by Tony Blair.
With an extremely impressive back history. One of the most successful television producers in this country, and a huge wealth earner for this country.
But that it's very unusual to give passes to Downing Street to random peers who are donors, that people get passes to Downing Street because they've got a specific job to do.
Well, and he had one briefly for 21 days. But look, the fact, when you talked earlier on about sinking into a Stygian swamp of sleaze, it's good alliteration, but it simply isn't true. Look, the reality is, if you look at the number of appointments that have been made, this is not remotely comparable to the Eccleston affair, in which the Labour Party was completely culpable, or anything like as it happened under Cameron or Johnson. And God alone knows what happened under Liz Truss.
The appointment of special advisors is a clearly different matter. I'm not criticising the appointment of special advisors. It's pretending these people are civil servants and getting them a full-time civil service paid jobs. This chap in the Treasury who's a Labour Party activist and donor.
Well, she's actually a former Bank of England, an expert within the Bank of England. As far as I'm concerned, the more experts we have in the Treasury, the better. Heaven knows the country's in a bad enough state.
The Bank of England's got everything wrong. That's slightly different.
Well, I think that's maybe a subject for another debate. Well, all the more reason for getting people from the Bank of England in.
You see, the high-mindedness of Starmer, that I'm not against people being appointed politically. I'm not against Prime Ministers using patronage. That's part of the job of a Prime Minister. But Starmer was so high-minded about it. And why hasn't he given authority to Sir Laurie, which he could do now, he could do before we finish broadcasting, to do these independent inquiries?
I mean, I'm sure he will, because, in all honesty, he's promised to actually bring the sort of the disinfectant of sunlight into it.
But he's fallen back on that classic politicians delaying tactic, the doctrine of the unripe time.
I'm sorry.
He could have done it today. He could have done it in the garden.
He's been dealing with the riots, he's been dealing with the Notting Hill Carnival, he's been dealing with endless things.
This takes 2 seconds. You have the authority to do it. And he hasn't done it. He said he took longer answering the question about why he hadn't done it than it would have taken him to do it.
Well, look, I think you make a point about hypocrisy. Well, I'm sorry, I mean, this business about the helicopter today, a lot of people said that was sort of performative hair shirtism. I think what this really is someone who's been in power for 54 days, desperately trying to present a different image to the nation, symbolically in the Downing Street garden, which, to be honest, was an absolute swamp of sleaze under Johnson. And I give the guy a chance.
Well, this new image is part of it. Do you not think he looks very beautiful now? He's spent all this money on his new image and his new spectacles and so on.
I doubt he spends as much on his suits.
Beautiful.
Jacob, I doubt he spends as much on his suits as you do.
But I spend my own money on them.
Indeed you do.
I mean, if donors wish to send in subscriptions to my suits, I'd be very grateful. But I don't have a slush fund for my suits. And he has a suit slush fund.
Well, he doesn't have a suit.
Do you think his makeover was worth all this money? Does he look so much more handsome, do you think, in your distinguished view?
There's no way on God's green earth I'm going to get into the comments about the beauty or not the pulchritude of the leader of this country, the Prime Minister, whether he's handsome or beautiful or not.
But he's just paid a lot of money for it, given to him by Labour donors.
I'm sorry, my wife and my daughter may have a view on that. I do not.
Next time you come on, you must tell us what your wife and daughter think about this. But it's the hypocrisy that is the issue. You see,
So where is the hypocrisy, Jacob?
Oh, and that he attacked the Tories for doing less of what he is doing.
No, they did much, much more.
I'm
sorry.
We did not make...
In numerical terms, they did far, far more.
We did not make civil service appointments of cronies.
Well, hang on a second. I mean, Matt Hancock gave massive, great contracts for PPP to people he met down the pub. They put Baroness Bone in the House of Lords, and she's stuffed...
Hold on, Matt Hancock, you know it's untrue that contracts are not awarded by ministers. All ministers did...
If only that were true.
It is true.
Yeah.
It is true. All ministers do is say there is this company that's interested in bidding. They do not award contracts, and that's really clearly established. I was actually briefly Minister for Government Efficiency, and I had responsibility for procurement. There was no way I could have given a contract for as much as a pencil, let alone for millions of pounds.
We had at least one by-election, if you remember, in Herefordshire, where a minister, a Secretary of State, no less, had actually been pushing for a particular biochemistry company in Northern Ireland as a minister.
A former minister?
No, at the time, and you know who I'm talking about. I don't particularly want to go on about. Yeah.
And I think former minister, you mean. He wasn't a minister at the time. He was pushing for the contract.
He was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
He had been Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, but he wasn't doing it as a minister. He was lobbying, and that was improper.
I'm sorry, no. 1 minute he's a Secretary of State, next minute he's Caesar's wife. Is that right? I just don't see it that way.
This is... I mean, I'm not in favour of former ministers lobbying, but this was not a minister...
to hear it.
But this is not a minister awarding a contract, to get the facts right, which is important. So it's the hypocrisy. I think that British politics is pretty honest, and that what Starmer has done is poison the well by his false accusations against the Tories. And it serves him right that it's come back to bite him.
Well, I disagree with that. I mean, we have Northcote Trevelyan in this country. We have an independent civil service. Don't forget, in most countries in Europe, particularly in France, they have a thing called the cabinet system, when the entire civil service changes when the government changes.
As we move over to France, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop. But thank you, Stephen.